back of the electron carriers. They play an important role by transporting
They look like
electrons to
Legos.
reactions in the mitochondria.
They're just
In the
carrying
final steps of
electrons.
glycolysis, some ATP is produced, but not much. For every glucose molecule, only 2 net ATPs are produced outside the mitochondria. However, glycolysis has produced pyruvic acid, which still has a lot of energy available. Let's follow this pyruvic acid molecule into a mitochondria to see where most of the energy is extracted. As the molecule enters the mitochondria, 1 carbon is removed, forming carbon dioxide as a byproduct.
That's what you exhale.
Electrons are stripped, forming NADH. Coenzyme A attaches to the 2-carbon fragment, forming acetyl-CoA. Coenzyme A is removed, and the remaining 2-carbon skeleton is attached to an existing 4-carbon molecule that serves as the starting point for the citric acid cycle. The new 6-carbon chain is partially broken down, releasing carbon dioxide. Several electrons are captured by electron carriers, and more carbon dioxide is released. The carbon dioxide that you exhale comes from the reactions of cellular respiration. 2 ATPs are produced by the citric acid cycle for each molecule of glucose. At this point, only a small number of ATPs have been produced. However, more energy is available in the electrons that are being transported by electron carriers. While the citric acid cycle starts another round, let's follow an electron carrier to the next step in the process.
This is the electron transport chain.
Electron carriers such as NADH deliver their electrons to an electron transport chain embedded in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. The chain consists of a series of electron carriers, most of which are proteins that exist in large complexes.
You're passing electrons.
Electrons are transferred from one electron carrier to the next in the electron transport chain. Let's take a closer look at the path electrons take through the chain. As electrons move along each step of the chain, they give up a bit of energy. The oxygen you breathe pulls electrons from the transport chain, and water is formed as a byproduct. The energy released by electrons is used to pump hydrogen ions, the blue balls, across the inner membrane of the mitochondrion, creating an area of high hydrogen ion concentration. Hydrogen ions flow back across the membrane through a turbine. Much like water through a dam, the flow of hydrogen ions spins the turbine, which activates the production of ATP. These spinning turbines in your cells produce most of the ATP that is generated from the food you eat. The process you've just observed, cellular respiration, generates 10 million ATPs per second in just one cell. That ATP can power a biker up the trail, or it can power your brain cells as you learn challenging biology topics.
You're like, that's supposed to be funny. So that is a good video, but I know there's kind of a lot going on there, so I recommend watching that on your own. Like you pull up the lecture slides, put it in presentation mode, and you can just watch it. It kind of steps through everything. There's a lot more details than you have to know. So what I've said, just highlighting, just know you go from what you start with, what you end with, and where that's compartmentalized in the cell. Where is that happening? Cytosol, mitochondria, mitochondria. The whole point is we are converting fuels like sugar. Fat also feeds into this pathway in the Krebs cycle. You are breaking down fuels and ultimately using oxygen, which is the final electron acceptor. You saw those little electrons being passed. They get passed from one carrier to another. Oxygen accepts the electrons, it gets split, and it turns into water. And in the process of that whole cycle, you generate CO2, and you generate ATP, and you generate water. So when you're respiring, you're doing aerobic respiration, you're breathing in oxygen, and all of your cells are doing these pathways. They're doing glycolysis, they're doing Krebs cycle, they're doing electron transport, transporting electrons, ultimately to spin that crazy turbine that actually makes ATP. It's an ATP maker. So this structure right here is called ATP synthase, and this is at the end of this electron transport chain. This is the structure, the big giant protein embedded in the matrix of the mitochondria that makes all the ATP, okay? So when you exhale, what is the main gas you're exhaling? CO2. Where did that CO2 come from?
It's a byproduct of one of these cycles. Is it the Krebs
Right.
cycle or the third one?
Yes, ma'am. It's a Krebs cycle. Perfect, Lauren. It is a byproduct of one of these cycles, specifically the Krebs cycle. Right here is where you are breaking down further that acetyl-CoA and turning it in through a series of steps, and ultimately you get some CO2. So there's 2 CO2 for every spin of this cycle of enzymatically converting this down. The whole process is we're just burning, literally burning fuel. This is how your body is surviving on fuel. You need the food, the fuel, you need oxygen, and you need water. Your metabolism will your cells will put this through this entire metabolic pathway, these 3 cycles, to generate all the ATP that you need, which is the energy molecule from all the food that you consume, okay? There's whole classes on biochemistry and metabolism and all these metabolic pathways. So I get that you're like, oh my gosh, but I want you to understand the bare minimum, not the intermediates, what you start with, what you end with, and where these occur. Yes? Okay, so this is how, and we can put fat. We can burn down protein, amino acids, and also fat in the mitochondria, putting them into the Krebs cycle and breaking them down, and then the electron transport chain, ultimately making a lot of ATP. So all the macromolecules we've talked about, you can actually metabolize and break down through these pathways of glycolysis, splitting of glucose, that's what it means, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, ETS, or ETC, electron transport chain. Yes? Okay. I got another movie. This is kind of cool. This shows the ATP synthase. So at the end of the electron transport chain, where it's almost like all the little protein complexes are passing the high energy electrons from one to the next, like a baton. They're passing them, and as they move down, they drop in energy. And on the other side, oxygen gets those electrons and gets split. That's where you need oxygen. Aerobic respiration. We cannot survive and do any of this ultimately at the end without oxygen, okay? So oxygen accepts those electrons, and then in that process of the electrons moving, there's a gradient that gets built up. Remember acids, you have a lot of hydrogen ions. That space at the edge of the mitochondria gets an accumulation of acid or hydrogen ions because they're being pumped in that process of moving the electrons. It pumps hydrogen ions out of the inner membrane of the mitochondria. As those hydrogen ions accumulate, like in that video, you have a high gradient now. That gradient is used to power this ATP synthase. As they funnel down their gradients, going from where they're high to where they're low, and it's really like diffusion because they're already really high out in the inner membrane area, and then they go to where they're low. They actually move through this little turbine that spins this amazing ATP synthase, and this is the structure that actually builds your ATP. It constructs it from ADP and phosphate, putting it back together. So actually creating adenosine diphosphate plus an inorganic phosphate, gluing them back together and making a brand new ATP molecule, which is this really important high energy molecule that allows your body to do everything it needs to do. So if we look at this, how these actually flow down and how it turns.
ATP synthase is a molecular machine that works like a turbine to convert the energy stored in a proton
This is
ring
twisting.
into chemical energy stored in the bond energy of ATP.
These are hydrogen ions. So they come in and cause this to twist, which causes that to twist and that to twist. This took decades to figure
The
this out.
flow of protons down their electrochemical gradient drives a rotor that lies in the membrane. It is thought that protons flow through an entry open to one side of the membrane and bind to rotor subunits. Only protonated subunits can then rotate into the membrane, away from the static channel assembly. Once the protonated subunits have completed an almost full circle and have returned to the static subunits, an exit channel allows them to leave to the other side of the membrane. In this way, the energy stored in the proton gradient is converted into mechanical rotational energy. The rotational energy is transmitted via a shaft attached to the rotor that penetrates deep into the center of the characteristic lollipop head, the F1 ATPase, which catalyzes the formation of ATP.
ADP plus inorganic phosphate brings them together. It's got an enzymatic, this is basically like an enzyme on this bottom end. Brings them close together so it can
The F1
regenerate new
ATPase
ATP.
portion of ATP synthase has been crystallized.
So we know exactly what this looks like and exactly what that looks like and how the rotor twists and causes this to change conformation and build ATP. about it. It goes on, and it kind of plays that. You might not think that's cool. You might be like, oh my God, I just had to know this. Basically, working that out, let us know this is exactly how the cells of your body, every single one of them, is able to make ATP. This is why we need nutrients, we need food, we need to break them down into their monomers, and then put them through these metabolic reactions and ultimately get all this ATP. Hence the name ATP synthase. Synthase comes from synthesis. This is the protein machinery that allows ATP synthesis to happen. That's why we call it ATP synthase. We can also take, this is right from your textbook. It goes over like when you eat a pizza that has proteins in the meat, if you have meat on it, or other kinds of veggies, carbohydrates in the bread, fats in the cheese, the dairy component of it. All of these things can kind of feed in. Does this make sense? Are you guys good? Are you lost completely? Okay, if you need more help with this, come by during my office hours and we'll go over this, and make sure you read the textbook. These are, as we go through this class, it's going to be really important that you read and you get the material and then you come to class, because some of this is not easy to just get the first time around. So proteins into amino acids, those are the monomers, those can feed into glycolysis. They can also feed into the Krebs cycle. The fats that you consume in your diet, those can actually go into glycolysis. They can be broken down in glycolysis, and the fatty acids in the fats can be turned into acetyl-CoA, ultimately going again to the Krebs cycle. Citric acid cycle is another name for the Krebs cycle. It's literally a series of enzymatic steps, converting it from one substrate to another. So if we have the sugars, they go through the straight path. If we have fats, they get routed into different components of these three metabolic pathways. Same with the proteins. They feed into glycolysis, acetyl-CoA, and the Krebs cycle. Ultimately, what you need is oxygen, right? You need oxygen, and you need these types of fuels to go through glycolysis, Krebs, and electron transport chain to make ATP. This is how your food is converted into energy. Literally, this is how your food is converted into energy. This is the main pathway that actually does that. So the ATP cycle, as we've talked about before, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, you break down organic nutrients by cellular respiration, this whole process, to transfer energy to form ATP. So you've got a lot of recycled, moving around molecules of ADP and phosphate. The ATP synthase is able to reform ATP from ADP and phosphate. So from the things that you take in, food, fuels, powering this electron transport chain, and oxidative phosphorylation, your cells are able to make a lot more ATP, which is then used for doing all the energy consuming things that you do. For breathing, for moving, for talking, for thinking, for just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing. Just allowing all the metabolic processes of your body to continue. You need ATP. So it can be used for all those energy things. Muscle contraction, moving, thinking, breathing, building protein, building new muscle, protein within your muscles, within your cells, within your tissues. If you start making ATP or have a problem with any of these pathways, it could ultimately lead to death, because you will have no way to make energy to sustain the entire physiology and pathways of your body. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this is really vital to life, understanding fuel to ATP. This is how you're able to keep sustaining and surviving. Yes? Okay. I'm going to go on further from there. Let's fill this in together. Yes? Okay. Yeah. If you're still really overwhelmed with this, come see me during office hours. We'll draw, we'll break it down, read the textbook, highlight the textbook, make note cards. People that take even just basic bio, like Bio 1 or Bio 10, 11, they make note cards and flashcards for everything. They don't just read. I know it's different because some of you are in different majors where it's a lot of reading and it's a lot of writing. It's not a lot of remembering a ton of different facts. Flashcards and writing things down, repetition and having these little cards to sort of learn the language. I think I was talking, Bobby, we were talking about this, learning the language and the terms. Like you may get it conceptually, but you still have to learn the language. You've got to learn some of these key terms, and they're brand new for you. When I learned them, they were brand new for me. So I had to write them down, I had to write flashcards. Okay, glycolysis, what is that? Okay, Krebs cycle, what is that? Okay, what do we enter, what enters the pathways, and what exits the pathways? So if we were to break this down, this is a cell, the whole entire thing is a cell. This is a nice little kidney bean mitochondria, right? So let's just write that. We're out in the cytoplasm of the cytosol. This is just out surrounding the nucleus. This structure right here is the mitochondria, just one of them. You've got dozens to hundreds in all your cells, especially your muscles. If your muscles are really active, you can have hundreds to thousands of mitochondria per muscle fiber or per muscle cell. So out in the cytosol, what is the cellular respiration or the metabolic pathway or process that happens out of here? There we go. Okay, good. Glycolysis means lysis or breakdown of the glucose, sugar breakdown. That's where you first break it from 6 carbon into 2 carbon structure. How many ATP get generated in this process? 2. Yes. See, you guys are getting it. You feel like you may not be, but I know you are. 2 ATP. Then we get this, ultimately this glycolysis leads to glucose into something called pyruvate. It's a 3 carbon little half of a sugar molecule. This gets funneled into the mitochondria, right? It gets converted first into a chemical that has to be put through this metabolic pathway, or this circle, this cycle. What's this cycle called? Let's skip ahead.
Krebs.
Okay, perfect. Krebs. Some people say Krebs, but I say Krebs cycle after the biochemist person that worked it out. There's a product that has to enter, so this has to be converted into something else before it can enter the Krebs cycle. Acetyl-CoA, yes. Acetyl-CoA, coenzyme A, okay? So this is a product that actually product from this pathway, but substrate that enters the Krebs cycle. So now it can be converted through a series of steps to other kind of 3 carbon and 6 carbon sugar molecules as it gets converted through, okay? How many ATP are created during the Krebs? 2 ATP, okay. Do we get a lot of energy here?
No.
No. Do we get a lot of energy here?
No.
No. But we also get something that's really important here, that's going to ultimately feed into the last part of this pathway that gives you all the ATP. What is this last pathway called? Okay, like etc. Electron transport chain, because all those protein complexes are actually passing electrons from one protein that has a lot of iron. There's a lot of iron in it. You need iron. Makes up those complexes. It's grabbing electrons and passing them down like a baton. Okay, and as it's passing it down, it sets up a concentration gradient that powers this guy, that powers the ATP synthase. So this is oxidative. I'll say and oxidative. I'll just spell it all the way out. Phosphorylation. Yeah. Okay. ATP synthase is doing its business here. How many ATP ultimately are in this process?
32.
32. Okay? So the grand total, somewhere around 36 ATP. And in this process, we also generate the electron carriers. This is a crazy name. It's nicotinamine, adenine, dihydrogenase. Oh wait, nicotinamine, don't even remember it. You don't have to know that. Your eyes are going to glaze over anyways. NADH, we abbreviated it as, okay? And this is an electron carrier that carries electrons. So those are being created in both of these steps here. And I'll put NADH here. These are electron carriers. So remember in the video, the little Legos? Little Legos with the little buzzing electrons? It's being created. It's grabbing those electrons, taking it from that original fuel molecule, and then gets to carry it, and it goes down where it's going to be used in the electron transport chain to actually help set up the gradient that powers that turbine, that ATP synthase. Okay, also in the Krebs cycle, we have some products that come off, and this is where you exhale CO2. Breaking down the sugar molecule even further, or the fat, or the amino acids, generates CO2. And here, coming into this, we should have this whole entire thing. At these final stages, this is where you need oxygen. We're aerobically respiring organisms, and to actually do this, pass those electrons, we need oxygen that actually accepts those electrons that were passed, splits the oxygen, and makes water molecules. So you generate water, ATP, and CO2. This looks messy. You guys right-wing, you didn't like it. But does this make sense? These are all the pieces, and that's what's happening in each part. Whether it is sugar or amino acids or fatty acids that are feeding into this, they break down through these specific enzymes in these locations in the mitochondria that ultimately lead to about 36 ATP. I will say, this number is not exact. Sometimes it's less. It's like 32 or 34 because it costs energy to pump the ATP out of the mitochondria. You can't just keep all your ATP in your mitochondria. We have to get it out. You have to use it throughout your cell and throughout your body. But it's for us, 2, 32, about 36. Yes, we did this fill-in all together to write it down, makes sense? All right, I'm deleting. Wait. Yes.
Where's the water?
I would do it here. It comes into the electron transport chain and ultimately gets converted to water molecules. So this accepts electrons, E's, gets converted to water. So this happens at the final stages right here. Good question. And that animation goes over that really nice. It shows the two oxygens coming in, they accept the electrons, they split. Basically, the electron is synonymous with hydrogen. A hydrogen carries an electron. So it grabs a hydrogen and becomes H2O. H2O. And it does that, accepting those final electrons. Okay? All right. Can I erase it now?
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah.
There's two NADHs, the negative one, and then the one from the glide.
There's a couple at each step. Yes.
Oh, okay.
So there's a couple here that are getting generated. There's a couple here at Krebs cycle. These guys are floating around and they make it here to actually do their business.
But
the Legos have to pass their electrons.
Okay, but the one from the Krebs cycle is negative?
It's not a negative. This is saying electrons.
Oh, okay.
It's carrying electrons. Sorry, good point. Yeah. When I put E negative, that means electron. Or negative E. Okay?
Thanks.
Yes, we got it? Okay, so it's good if you can kind of fill in that. That's like the level of detail, not what each thing is in the middle, but the overall sort of products that come out. So there's one other element. So aerobic respiration implies this entire process from glucose or original fuel all the way down to using oxygen, making 36 ATP, CO2, and water, right? Those are all the things that come out. But are you always, all the cells in your body, always going to have a lot of access to oxygen?
No.
What about if you're pushing it real, real hard? And you're doing the stairs or the stepper or the treadmill, or you're sprinting, you're running for a while, right? Are you going to use up the oxygen that you're taking in? Like your body tissues, your cells are going to use up the oxygen. So when you use up and you don't have enough oxygen to keep replenishing to your muscle tissues, your fibers, we can actually use glycolysis and this other process called lactic acid fermentation, where this is all happening right out here in the cytosol. So you generate pyruvate from glycolysis, glucose to pyruvate. This is all in the cytoplasm. You can actually put this into something called lactic acid, and I'll give you a way to remember this, you won't forget. Lactic acid fermentation. Basically, enzymes that will go, okay, we don't have a lot of oxygen. We need oxygen for these final steps in here. We're running out of oxygen. But we need to keep sustaining. We need to keep exerting. We want to keep using the muscles, right? We will funnel pyruvate into lactic acid enzymes that will break down pyruvate into lactic acid. Just a couple enzymatic steps. Cleave, cleave, cleave. Lactic acid, okay? And in doing that, you can generate another 2 ATP right here. So, still, is that a lot? No. But if we keep doing this and you're using glucose from your blood, right, and you get 2 ATP here, we go, you know what, let's use this as a fuel. Let's just stay out here in the cytoplasm, break it down, turn it into lactic acid or lactate, and we get another 2 ATP. Okay, so quick and dirty, we get 4 for each glucose molecule. 4 is not 36, but when you're desperate and you don't have enough oxygen, you can keep sustaining, right, as long as you keep breaking that glucose down. So it generates lactic acid when O2 is scarce or not available. We call this would be an anaerobic pathway. When you're pushing yourself into a zone where you're running out of oxygen, right? But your muscles are still performing, you're still going, you're still doing it. And this actually is all happening in the cytoplasm, not in the mitochondria. So it's quick, it's efficient. I say it's quick and dirty because it's not going through the whole system and all the path, and takes a lot more steps, a lot more enzymes, a lot more machinery to get to that final production of using the ATP synthase. This is going at just a simple level. We're going to make ATP as quick as we can. We're going to use that. Okay? So your muscles will actually do this, and we have a difference in the types of muscle fibers that you have in your muscles themselves. We have fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. Have you guys heard of these? Fast twitch fibers can contract very quickly, very forcibly, and they have high energy and they're strong, but they run out of energy more quickly. They can't sustain you for a long period of time, okay? So these will actually operate by a lot of glycolysis and lactic acid fermentation. Quick, powerful, we don't have a lot of oxygen, we're kind of running out. We're gonna do it as good as we can and create that lactic acid and use that to get a little bit of ATP. Slow twitch muscle is actually slower to contract and actually has good stores of oxygen within it. So it actually hangs on to oxygen within the cells, keeps it nice and tight there, even keeps sugar stores. Sugar stores of glycogen, remember glycogen, right? The animal storage of sugar, it's big branched, keeps the glycogen in the muscle fibers, keeps oxygen bound to molecules in the fibers. So that those slow twitch muscles don't have to worry about running out of oxygen. They go, we have a supply, we got sugar, we got oxygen right here, we can just keep doing it. They can keep doing this all day, almost all day. So muscles of the neck, muscles of the back, postural muscles, you're all sitting upright, right? You're holding your necks, you're sitting pretty straight, right? So those are all engaged in contracting. You don't even really have to think that much about it. Those are slow twitch muscle fibers. These are good for longer generated contractions, staying contracted. There's people that are marathon runners. They've got a lot of slow twitch muscle fibers. They can keep going for a long time, okay? They're taking in oxygen, but they also have oxygen stores. Sprinters, if someone's more like real good for short bursts and like powerlifting, some sprinting, doing like the 40 meter, the 400 meter, like smaller, not big miles and miles, they have more fast twitch muscles. These are quick, they get a lot of energy fast, they do glycolysis and lactic acid fermentation, so they get not as much ATP, but they have it real quick. They run out, and they're not able to do all these other pathways. So then that's it. So usually people with strength and conditioning and also genetics, they have different combinations of fast twitch and slow twitch muscle, which actually incorporates the different sides of these metabolic pathways, whether they mostly do anaerobic and glycolysis and generate lactic acid, or use this longer term oxygen that's stored, sugar that's stored, so they could just keep on going. With training, people will typically gain more slow twitch fibers. You'll notice that yourself, even if you start walking or running or doing any kind of program. Does it get easier? Right, it gets easier with time. Your muscles get more adapted. You get more of the sort of slow twitch muscle fiber capacity so that you can go further, you can walk further, you can run further, you can do all of that. So here I like to remember lactic acid fermentation. Doesn't need oxygen. This is when oxygen is scarce, running out. It's just a quick way to generate fast ATP. Want to power lift? That's what I'm going to use. My fast twitch muscles. Now, if I continue pushing myself, where I'm getting into this anaerobic zone, right? Where I'm pushing my muscles and I'm exerting, and I can only take in so much oxygen, even with my increase in heart rate and my respiration rate going up and dilating my lungs, I can only get so much oxygen, right? So I'm gonna start to reach a plateau where I have not enough oxygen. So I'm teetering on only this, making lactic acid, making lactic acid, making lactic acid. Have you ever worked out or done like even cycling? Have you guys ever done one of those spin classes or cycling or whatever? Does it start to burn?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it burns. They say feel the burn, like the good burn. That feel the burn, that's part of this lactic acid accumulation in your muscle fibers and surrounding those muscles because you're doing lactic acid fermentation. Now your body can also break down the lactate and use it as an energy source. So it accumulates and then it gets broken down. It accumulates, it gets broken down. We call that a lactic acid threshold. You can do tests on that where how long can you keep going through that lactic acid accumulation and buildup from doing anaerobic pathways. And if you train, you get better at that. You can keep going. You can go further even than you think you can go. But that basically comes from that kind of feel the burn. You're at this anaerobic capacity where you're pushing it so far. You are no longer having the time and ability to do glycolysis, Krebs cycle, ETS, and making lots of ATP. So your metabolism switches to more of the fast twitch cycling and using the glycolysis lactic acid. Yes? Make sense? Yeah? Christine.
So does it, like, should we like all have slow twitch muscle? Like, is fast twitch something like that's not good for you? Or?
No, they're both good. The combination of these is good. And with training, a lot of people will, we all have this. We all have these, okay? So with your genetics, training, and physical efforts, you can sort of change the proportion of these. Typically, depending on what kind of sport you do, if you're increasing in intensity and endurance and going longer and stronger, typically you'll gain more of the type that has all the enzymes that can do the slow twitch functions, which means you're doing this. You're doing aerobic respiration efficiently for a longer period of time.
So like, sorry, just like a way to think about it, like, so like a slow twitch would be like a long distance runner that runs for a long period of time? Or?
No. Slow twitch is fast, strong contraction, burns out. Because it doesn't have a lot of oxygen. It doesn't have a big sugar store and a lot of oxygen. So those are the muscles that you use more for power. They're more for power, and they kind of burn out.
It's like rowing, the sport rowing when you do 2K.
Yeah. So if you think of longer term, running longer distances, pushing it with greater stamina, doing it for longer periods of time, your slow twitch muscles will start to become more predominant and more active. They're the ones that can keep doing aerobic respiration. They don't have to rely on a ton of lactic acid fermentation and glycolysis. Glycolysis is the first step, but they take it further. They go, oh, we got oxygen stores right here, we got sugar stores right here, we got glycogen. Your skeletal muscles are packed with glycogen. They're clipping it, and using it. So slow twitch is more marathon, fast twitch is more sprinting, quick, power, strength.
Yeah, so
You have both, everybody has both. So if I were to train to be, I'm not so much a sprinter, I can do more longer distance. I got more slow twitch fibers without a doubt.
Okay.
And slow twitch fibers predominate in your torso and your back and your neck. Fast twitch predominate more in your limbs, your upper and lower limbs. So quick intensive bursts of energy, strength, a lot of fast twitch. Torso, maintenance of posture, hips, back, neck, a lot more slow twitch. You can train though, and you can change that. They change their metabolic enzymatic capacity with training. So how do we measure metabolic rate? So these are the ways that we actually measure metabolic rate. Okay, so we talked about the nooks and crannies of oxygen, breaking down sugar, getting ATP. Now how do we measure metabolic rate? It's measured by the amount of oxygen consumed per minute. So I can sit you up, I can have you breathe into an apparatus, and I can measure how much O2 you're burning per minute. And that will give me information on what is your metabolic rate. That means how fast are you using oxygen, converting it into these final substrates of ATP, water and CO2. Yes? Okay. Why would I measure it by amount of O2 consumed? Why does that measure metabolic rate? The amount of oxygen consumed. Does that, why? So these pathways right here represent metabolism. These are metabolism, right? This is your cellular respiration pathways of metabolism. All these in combination make up your metabolism. In essence, this is the pathway that metabolism follows, that your metabolism is doing, and how fast it's doing it.